Welcome to another Thursday night Bible study, brought to you as a ministry of SIGBC.
Contemplate, let all that you do be done in love, part 2. So we've been talking for about 11 weeks now on the subject of love, and the reality is that everything that we do in life should be based on our actions of love. You know, the older you get, I'm still young, but the older you get, the more that you realize how silly it is to argue and fight. How silly it is to act in self-centered and self-seeking and selfish endeavors. Because every one of us, the day will come when we are no longer here upon the earth. And since it is what we do in relationship with other people that ultimately defines our value, then it behooves us to contemplate the reality that all that we do should be done in love. And as we saw last week, love for God, love for our fellow man. And so last week we saw that giving is an expression of love, which is why it's called charity. The word charity actually means love. It is the way the word agape is translated in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, that famous chapter on love. So, love is not just, as we saw last week, love is not just about a feeling, and love is not just about an act. Love is always a feeling that always results in an action. And without both the emotional attachment as well as the living it out in real life, we can't really describe that as genuine love. And so the actions validate the heart. We talked a little bit last week about the fact that Olympians, they run just because they want to show that they are the best in the world. And they compete for the prize of being the best in the world. And they receive a medal, they receive a crown. But that wasn't the purpose for running. That was just a token that expressed their position in the games. And so what we do is not the end-all be-all of love. However, it is a token expression of the fact that we truly love. The second thing we want to see from verses 4 through 9 of 1 Corinthians chapter 16 is that endurance for the good of others is an expression of love as well. In other words, for example, if you are a parent, then when you have a child, your workload increases dramatically. You lose sleep, you cost more money, you got to pay for diapers, you got to pay for formula, you got to hire a babysitter, and so your expenses and your efforts increase exponentially. But you're happy to endure those struggles, those trials, those difficulties. Why? Because you love that child. And you know that it is your job as a parent to love that child, not just emotionally, but in actions as well. So endurance for the good of others is an expression of love. And so, especially verse 9, we look at verses 4 through 9, but especially contemplating verse 9. If it seems advisable, Paul says, for me to go also, they will accompany me. Remember, they were talking about the act of giving to meet the needs of the poverty-stricken in Jerusalem during a famine. And he says, if it is advisable for me to go also, they will accompany me. After I go through Macedonia, I will come to you, for I will be going through Macedonia. Perhaps I will stay with you for a while. This is talking to the Corinthians, remember. Or even spend the winter, so that you can help me on my journey wherever I go. For I do not want to see you now and make only a passing visit. I hope to spend some time with you, if the Lord permits. But I will stay at Ephesus until Pentecost, because a great door for effective work has been opened to me, and there are many who oppose me. Well, Paul is saying, I long to see you believers at Corinth, and I desire to encourage the believers at Ephesus. And where I am now, there's a great door of effectual ministry, that is meeting the needs of those who are there spiritually, who are there around him at the time. But he said there are also many who oppose me. So endurance for the good of others is an expression of love. When we are contemplating going to the field, or when we are explaining, once we are on furlough, visiting churches in America, when we are explaining the ministry that God has called us to, one of the things that people who are missionaries often say is, I love the people God has called us to minister to. And that is a genuine feeling. But what is it that you love about the people? Some people, they love the culture that they're in. They love the prosperity of the country that they're in. They love the hospitality of the people that they're ministering to. And they love it because of the benefits that they get from being in that particular ministry calling. And yet the reality is, when you love someone, you rejoice in the opportunity to serve them. And yes, there are struggles, and yes, there is loneliness, and yes, there is financial problems, and yes, there is blood, sweat, and tears in serving God in the ministry. But you do so because you love those that you are called to serve, even in the midst of those who might oppose you. And so endurance for the good of others is an expression of love. Third thing we see here is that service is an expression of love. In other words, being willing to humble ourselves and not act like we are more educated or more physically capable or better at understanding. No, we humble ourselves and we choose to serve, and that service is an expression of love. Those who have been in our ministry for a while have heard me say on occasion that one of the things that I tell young pastors who are just going into the ministry, maybe they've just graduated from Bible college and they're just going into the ministry and they're learning, one of the things that I often encourage these young pastors to do is to take upon themselves the task of cleaning the toilets at the church. Because that, number one, nobody wants to clean the toilets. I mean, it's a dirty job, it's the worst job at the church probably, and nobody wants to do it. So doing a job that nobody else wants to do is, in fact, an act of love. Because service is an expression of love. But also, it shows I recognize that I'm not better than everybody else. And I have no position that says other people must do these dirty jobs because my position is so important. I'm not going to do them. And so, in humility, we serve others if we genuinely love those that God has called us to serve. So here in verse 10 through 19, Paul gives some examples, and we'll mention a couple of these that we'll close for today, and then we'll come back next week and conclude this particular study. But the first person we see is Timothy, who served Paul and ministered to the churches even though he was timid. And so Paul is concerned about Timothy, so he says in verses 10 and 11, when Timothy comes, see to it that he has nothing to fear while he is with you. For he is carrying on the work of the Lord just as I am. No one then should treat him with contempt. Send him on his way in peace, so that he may return to me. I am expecting him along with the brothers. So Paul says, look, Timothy, he's young, he's inexperienced, he lacks confidence, he's very timid, and so it's easy to look down upon someone who has those character traits. But he has a heart of a servant, and he is important to the ministry because he is willing to serve God by serving others, because he's genuinely, though young, an individual of commitment to others. Paul said, to Timothy, let no man despise your youth, but be an example to the believers. In other words, don't worry when other people might criticize you that you're young. Just be such a godly example in humility and service that they see that even though you're young, you're a good guy because you serve out of love. So no one then should treat him with contempt. Send him on his way in peace so that he can return to me. I'm accepting him along with the brothers. And then the second person he mentions is Apollos. Apollos taught the churches to grow in Christ, even as Paul was an evangelist. So you have Paul, who committed his life to proclaiming the message of the gospel to as many people as he possibly could in as many ways as he possibly could. He said, I've been called to the Gentiles as the apostles have been called to minister to the church in Israel. And even though my heart's desire and prayer to God for Israel is that they might be saved, Romans chapter 10, verse 1, I know my calling is to minister to those who have never heard the message. And so Paul said, I don't want to go and preach where other people have already preached. No, I want to go and witness to people who have never heard the message of the gospel. And then quite frequently when Paul would establish a church and win people for Christ, then he would call upon others who would be willing to come and to serve in those churches. He left Titus in some of the churches. He left Timothy in some of the churches. And Apollos came and helped him to teach and disciple many of the people in churches that Paul had established along the way. And so Apollos taught the churches to grow in Christ, even as Paul was called to evangelize. And so verses 12 through 14, we read, Now about our brother Apollos, I strongly urge him to go to you with the brothers. He was quite unwilling to go now, but he will go when he has the opportunity. Be on your guards, stand firm in the faith, be courageous and be strong. Do everything in love. And there it is. When Paul is talking about Apollos, that great teacher who desired to serve God by helping others to grow in Christ. When Paul wanted him to go and help the new believers in the church that he had just established, Apollos says, God has called me to do something else right now. I will go when the time is right, but I can't go right now. And so Paul says, I encouraged Apollos to go to you with those who are coming to help disciple you. But right now he can't. But eventually he will come because his desire is to serve. So for now, be on your guard. Stand firm in the faith. Be courageous, be strong, and just choose to do everything that you do in love. And then he's going to mention Stephanas, and then he's going to mention Aquila and Priscilla, and examples of those for whom service for others in the ministry was an expression of their love for God and for those they were called to serve, whether it be in evangelism or discipleship or leading the church as the pastor. let all that you do be done in love. No matter where it is that God has called us as Christians to serve, the basis for service is love.
Thank you for listening. You can also join us in person or live on Facebook every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Japan time. This has been a ministry of Sakahogi International Grace Baptist Church.